What also comes is regularly scheduling board meetings of the South Tahoe community. If you would all please stand and join me in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, do we have any comments from the audience on non-agenda items? I'm not seeing the big rush to the podium, so do we have any corrections to the agenda or consent calendar? And I'm not seeing a big rush for that either, so how about we have a motion for adoption?
I would happily accept and second that motion.
Yeah, and that passes 5-0. Okay, we can move right on to item 6A, which is talking about the cell tower on our property.
Back in 2016, we started negotiating with Verizon for them to install a cell tower here at the plant. And after a fair bit of negotiation and back and forth, we have come to an agreement, and that's what's before you today. The site for the tower would be out behind the boneyard, out here and back, outside of the fence. They would access the property by coming through our back gate, going through the boneyard, through the back fence, which they'll have a key to that gate, and then accessing their portion of the property or their facility. The agreement before you is for an option for the lease, and that is for $1,000 for the year for the option for 12 months and renewable for another 12 months for $1,000 as well. And then the lease itself is for $3,000 a month with a 3% per year escalator. And it is for four additions. There's the initial 5-year term, and then 4 additional 5-year terms after that. And then it becomes, again, renewable beyond that time period. We've also negotiated the rights to negotiate with anybody who wants to sublease and get additional site space on their cell tower, so that as other carriers come in, and we're able to negotiate with them and generate revenue from their siting on our property as well. So with that, staff recommends that the board authorize execution of the option and land lease agreement with Verizon for a communications facility on the district's property. Any questions I can answer?
Were you able to get the one looking like a palm tree like I wanted?
That is the plan. That's right. We're gonna resurrect it, put Christmas lights on it as well. And I think the term is not.
I know they have those. I've seen them.
And hang a banana moon on it.
The SDPD logo and lights.
My question that you really answered is AT&T is short a tower as well, and whether you thought AT&T was going to be looking to, or whether they would even let them.
Everything that we've heard is that the other carriers will come on to are expected to come onto this tower down the road.
And what's the time frame before
As far as before it's constructed, we don't know. They've got to still go through the full TRPA permitting process. So that's really the holdup. They have an option for 12 months for $1,000, and which I expect they'll go through their permitting process during that time and try to accelerate and try and get it accomplished. But we don't know what their construction time period is. They've done a fair bit of surveying. They've done some geotechnical boring out there. They've certainly already invested some money in the site. One of the issues is that they wanted us to provide power to the site through our facilities. We looked at it, talked with our electricians. We think it actually takes up capacity for the circuit that comes to the plant, and so they're actually going to have to install a line coming off of at Tahoe. They'll have to come in through the forest in order to provide power to the facility.
It's actually kind of a big plus for us, I would think, just in the community, just kind of the same way affordable housing is, because I mean, there's like a 4-foot square area in my house that I just wanted to know that they're talking about.
Yeah. Did they look at the property up there, like the open lot, a little higher elevation?
this is where they always wanted to be. It's really the site that they, I think from the get-go is where they wanted to be. So I'm not sure what else they looked at on our property.
But I'd do a press release once you were going along. I mean, that's just what.
Yeah, and it's not a ton of money, but every little bit helps, so it's a good thing.
It has, again, it has cost us time, staff time, as well as Gary's time, so we definitely have some money into this already. So the first year, we'll probably be paying back what we've spent on it so far, but after that, we expect it'll be revenue generating. Our lawyers and their lawyers.
Okay, does anybody have anything else?
So I'd be happy to make that motion as presented. You want me to read it? Okay. I move that we authorize the execution of the option and land lease agreement with Verizon for a communication facility on district property.
I'll second that.
Yeah, and that passes 5-0. Payment claims.
I move approval of payment of claims in the amount of $1,743,528.70.
And then once again, a 5-0 vote. Which, we're moving right along here, so we're already into standing and ad hoc committee reports. Is there any of those that anyone would want to pitch in with?
One comment we might want to try to arrange before the day before the next board meeting, we have a meeting with the Alpine County supervisors. And so we thought, it's at 1 o'clock in our conference here, they can come here this time. So we ought to have just a fairly short pre-meeting, if everybody's convened, probably, I think that same day, probably be the way to do it, so that we can have our ducks in the line in terms of what we might say and what we might not say. So maybe just we'll look for an email and we'll, I don't know what it is, if it's at 1 o'clock and we'll come in at 12:30 or 12:45 is would be good enough. But we'll, like I said, we'll arrange it by email before then.
Okay. And that's Dwayne and Chris.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we don't have any other standing or ad hoc, how about regular board member reports? Does anybody have anything?
I would couple.
I'll let you read this off.
One is, you two may know more about this, and I just got a copy of it. For some reason, the FAA is intending to expand the width mainly the width of their flight overlay pattern. And
for do you know for turbine or props or
for everything, as far as I know. And what that means is it restricts generally the way it's happened before years ago when I worked with it when I was at the chambers. It can restrict new building, keep you from replacing a building if there's a fire, it can keep you from adding density, anything that would add anything that a plane might hit in that overlay zone. It could be a problem for affordable housing or issues that we might have if we were putting in a well house or something like that. So I've got a copy of it, I just haven't read it yet. If you want me to get it to somebody here.
Is there a copy of the map of the current and then future?
Yeah, and I'm not trying to panic everybody because I don't know for sure, but the last time we had a heck of a time because it comes out and covers a little bit of the keys. You know how
right. Well, make sure you get that to us, and I'd like to take it to our next city ad hoc committee meeting because the city, well, they're probably already aware of it, I'm sure, but it's an area that I think we'd like to discuss on.
They're just generally aware. I know the Board of Realtors, I got my copy from the Board of Realtors, and they're really worried.
And then that next day, I have to be meeting is on the morning of the 18th, which is on.
Yeah, there's actually a
next,
typo in, under item 12, future meetings, it's just been changed. It's actually the 18th.
Good catch. And then the other is, I attended a council meeting where Caltrans made a presentation of all the things that they plan on doing in 2017. That doesn't mean they'll start them because they're doing 19, excuse me. I was thinking they didn't do it in 2017 the way they thought they would, but they're talking about doing Ski Run Boulevard, Sierra Boulevard, and also Highway 50 at Sierra Boulevard.
Right, and I think they're actually going all the way to almost Weeks, I think.
Yes, so you and I know that it pretty well cuts off a lot of it's going to have to send a lot of traffic into the neighborhoods. In addition, the roundabout in Myers is planned for that year, as well as the bridge
On Echo Summit.
on Echo Summit, and they plan on a 14-day closure in June, and then the rest of the time they're going to be doing one-way traffic, caravans. And then, if I doubt it, but it's possible that the project, it's really doubtful, that what do they call it, the improvement project or the bypass at State Line might actually have get some demolition started. But it's really, really going to be a problem for businesses in our community. I don't know, Kelly, how do you get customers to you?
Well, this year has been so much better for us than last year, because last year they were right in front of us. We had a porta potty in the left-hand turn lane, and we couldn't make it. So it was really bad last year. So this year I think it's better, but like right now, which I'm sure you guys all know, anybody who's driven down Highway 50, it's a parking lot, right? It's a parking lot in front of us. And it seems to be worse going towards State Line, even though it's, one lane, but it's just so bad, it's backed up way past the line.
So those are the two things that I don't know what we would do except maybe look at how it might affect us, all those things. We use Sierra Boulevard a lot. So,
Okay, anybody else want to report on the report? Okay, that brings us to, I don't know if we had anything happen with the Elmira County Water Agency.
Actually, yeah, so we didn't have a meeting.
in September.
Yes, it
So
is.
we
We
should have a meeting next week.
Next week, okay. And, that brings us all the way to you, Richard.
Yeah, yesterday I attended the Workforce Housing Policy Subcommittee meeting, and everybody was very happy that we had passed our ordinance, bringing back the sewer transfer ordinance for low-income workforce housing. So you got, a lot of people think that's sort of a trend setter, and hoping that's a trend setter. The rest of the meeting was focused on what other things could be done to enhance workforce housing to incentivize them. And the previous meeting had voted for one of the primary issues that, as the Tahoe Prosperity Center says, comes up in every single discussion about the difficulties of doing workforce housing, is the parking requirements. So the city, the county, the GRPA members of the policy subcommittee engaged in a lengthy discussion of what could be done in the short term to basically reduce the number of spaces, parking spaces required per the workforce housing unit. What can be done in the short term, and how could ordinances or requirements be changed for the long term to basically kind of have that be part of the permanent requirements. And I think there was basically consensus that all the people in attendance were thinking that they could accomplish that, and certainly for, you might say, the core areas, certainly where this any new project would be within like a half a mile of transit route, bus stops, for those, that type of thing, because they would expect that, they're located in those, at that spot, and people could get around and survive without a car. And they would expect that some of the occupants of those units would be people who would, if they could get around, wouldn't own a car. And so that was kind of the focus of the meeting yesterday.
So is it true that instead of run bikes, you're going to put snowmobiles on all the corners?
I didn't hear that. I think like ice skates or something, it's like for cross-country skiing, Probably just do that. So that's all I have.
Oh, wow.
So we do want to do the water conservation program update next, as opposed to the more lengthy conservation discussion.
Okay.
Good afternoon, not morning, as Chris corrected me. I wanted to provide 3 quick updates for you guys on things that are happening right now. So this year, the district is being presented with a Best in Basin Award for our turf buyback program. TRPA's Best in Basin Award program annually recognizes projects that demonstrate either exceptional planning, implementation, or compatibility with Lake Tahoe's environment and community. And it was the 10th year of the turf buyback program. So in the 10 years since we've launched it, 339 residential and commercial projects have been completed. Over $615,000 in rebates have gone out, and over 409,000 square feet of turf has been removed. So that results in an estimated annual water saving of about 7.5 million gallons to date. So I just wanted to thank you guys for supporting this program for 10 years and to invite you to the award presentation if you'd like. It'll be during TRPA's regularly scheduled board meeting on October 24th at 9:30. The second thing I wanted to give you a quick update about is Jim had approached me a while back about, he had worked with the Sugar Pine Foundation, planting some sugar pines up on the North Shore. Since then, I reached out to the Sugar Pine Foundation and have been working with them and South Tahoe Environmental Education Coalition. And on October 29th and 30th, all of Lake Tahoe Unified School District's 6th graders are making the long walk up Al Tahoe Boulevard to our access gate, and they'll be planting sugar pines out behind the boneyard back there, as well as going to a few other educational stations, including I'm hosting one on what you can do to keep your water clean. So that'll be pretty fun if you're looking to run around with 6th graders or plant trees, October 29th and 30th. And then the last one I wanted to give you a heads up about is over the last year, we've done a slow rollout of WaterSmart to some of our metered customers. So as a reminder, WaterSmart is an online tool that allows customers to look at their water use, set up use notifications, and troubleshoot any problems before a really high bill arrives at the end of the quarter. And so during this last year, Jessica Henderson, who oversees our AMI data and WaterSmart and a lot of our meter program, has sent over 1,200 letters to our customers alerting them for leaks. Most of them were due to a leaky toilet flap or a broken valve in the irrigation system, or when you're turning on or off your irrigation or a home shutoff valve, not turning it on or off all the way. And almost all of them have fixed the problem, so that's been a great success. And the reason I'm telling you about this now is that October is our official launch of WaterSmart to the rest of our community, to everyone who is metered. So it's really exciting because now WaterSmart will automatically notify folks of leaks. Everyone with a meter is able to sign up and see their water use, set use notifications if they'd like to, go through the tutorial on fixing leaks. And on the first day we launched the program, On Monday, we had 300 people sign up. The bills are going out this week. So in the bills, there's a bill insert talking about Water Smart, and I've been working with our local media partners to try to get the word out too. So if your friends or family or people around ask you what the heck this Water Smart thing is, you'll know it's our online portal for folks to use. At the next board meeting, Jessica's going to give a more detailed update on it, but I just didn't want you to be looking at folks blankly if they asked you about something in the next 2 weeks.
I got one of your emails a couple of days ago.
And how was that for you?
And it seems to me, I just glanced at it,
Yeah.
it seems to me you wanted to start off with a survey, is that right?
Yeah, that's Water Smart, the portal. That's how they launch into it. And we've had mixed messages about the starting with a survey.
Yeah, I got
Did you fill it out?
No.
No, you got it. No, I don't want to. So, I've heard that comment. We've received a lot of positive feedback from second homeowners. We hear the feedback. Thanks for the peace of mind. Now I know what's going on at my house when I'm not there. And from the locals we've contacted about hidden leaks, it's, thank you. I had no idea that my toilet was leaking or my irrigation system was broken. But I have heard that comment of, why is the first thing you want me to do a survey? And that's just a part of the portal itself.
All right, I guess I'll answer.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Did it help in the big word?
Yeah,
Just to note that Wayne is asking about the Shelley talked about awards. On our website, there is a page, and I think Melanie sent out a link to it. There's a page on our website that lists all the awards the district has won over the years. And so if you didn't get the link, ask Bill to issue a hard copy or send it to me, you will get it.
I just got to thinking of it, over the years.
Yeah, it's a long list.
Why not,
There's a lot of
why not
things on
put
there.
that out there?
Yes.
And that gives you a hard copy when you've got a hard copy.
Thank you very much.
So,
Now it's time for the fun part of the board meeting, where the engineers are going to come up and talk. What everybody looks forward to. In preparation to the Proposition 218 rate setting process, we have developed 3 scenarios for the water 10-year CIP, and we are proposing to submit these to the rate consultant for analysis. Our expectation is the rate consultant will do an analysis of a 0% rate increase. And this is really the other end of that spectrum. This is the far end of the spectrum that we are presenting to you today. And we're looking to set the table for the discussion about rates going forward. So we're again bracketing, we perceive ourselves as bracketing the discussion with the scenarios that we're going to present. As we go through the presentation, we're asking you to, at the end, we will ask you to consider answering 3 questions for us. The first question is, do you agree that we should submit these 3 scenarios to the rate consultant for evaluation? And the second question is really based on any other scenarios you might have. If you think there's something else we should be looking at this point in the process, please let us know what those scenarios are so we can develop them and submit them now. But our perspective is that the consultant looks at 0% and then looks at these 3 scenarios. We'll be bringing that back to you and have further discussion so we can develop scenarios later in the process as well if you don't have something that you have a burning desire to have looked at this point. And then the third question is, how do we want to consider the percentages of rate increase that we look at after the Proposition 218 5-year process? In the past, we have looked at 2 or 3% for the years 6 through 10 in the 10-year plan. Is there a different number that you'd like us to look at? And so we can talk about these things and going forward, but we'll come back to these questions again at the end of the presentation as well. So we've done a substantial effort with staff here at the district to evaluate our water system and consider the assets and the conditions that we have within the water system. This is not the physical assessment that we're doing more on the sewer side, where we are sitting the camera down and physically looking at pipes. This has really been driven through data. It has been looking at the information that we have collected over the years and also generated in recent months as well. We looked at, for example, leak history on water lines. What's been happening? What's the maintenance need associated with those conditions? We've looked at how old is that well? What are the ages of these assets and where are they in their life cycle? As well as looking at the materials. We know that steel pipes are deteriorating at a certain rate compared to PVC pipes, and so we've looked at the materials of the assets that we have out in the field. And we used all these to develop these scenarios that we're going to present to you this afternoon. We also looked at all of the previous plans that have been developed for the water system and the projects that came out of those plans, the water system optimization plan, things of that nature. We looked at all the previous projects that have been on the table in the past and considered them and decided, well, looked at them very thoroughly and compared them and said, well, you know, this is really a low value, a low priority project. Let's move that off the plan. This is a project that is redundant. Let's move those. Let's figure out which one's the best plan to answer that, solve that problem, and let's take that one and move that other project off the plan. So we really went through and revised that project list of the things that we see as being valuable for the water system going forward. And we also went through and did a considerable amount of modeling on the water system and project evaluations to try and determine what are the absolute critical projects that we need to do that would deliver firefighting flows to 100% of the district. What's that specific project group? And we developed a scenario just around that as well. We also stepped back, and you've heard some of this discussion in the past about projects we can do to extend the life of our assets. I think you've heard and certainly understand that if we reduce the pressure in a pipe, we can extend how long it will last. And so we looked at other options other than just reducing pressure, other things that we can do to extend the life of the assets that we have in the field, and incorporated those kind of projects in these scenarios we're providing. We also looked at these projects that we're proposing and said, you know, what is the total project cost, not just the construction cost. And as we looked at projects that we had in the past and estimates that we provided, some of those plans just had construction costs. They didn't have total project costs. So we went through and we looked at design costs, permitting costs, inspection costs, as well as that construction cost. That's what we took, incorporated into these plans so that we could go forward with them. And that's what you'll see from the scenarios. As we had a lot of conversation going through this development process and looking at all these assets and assessing them, there was a fair bit of discussion about what happens when we get surprises. What about the things we don't know? What about things like the sinkhole at Tahoe Keys? What do we do about those things? How do we figure those into the plan? And we think the best way to do that is not to incorporate them in these plans, but rather to address those as we have in the past. When we do the annual evaluation for capital projects, if we have something that comes up unexpectedly, let's incorporate it into the plan and see what its priority is versus the other project. Let's look at that every year, make sure that we're investing money in the right places at any given time. That may mean that we have to push a project off the plan or push it out farther in the years, but let's make sure that we're investing the money in the right places at the right time. We propose to do that rather than setting aside a bunch of money to account for these unknown conditions that go forward. So that's how these scenarios and a lot of the information that's gone into the scenarios that we've developed and that you're going to see here today. These are the three scenarios that we're proposing again. These are what we're proposing to send to the rate consultant for analysis, for them to develop and come back to us with rates that would achieve these goals. And I'm going to turn it over to John, Julie, and Steve, and they're going to go through each one of these scenarios a fair bit more in detail. and they're going to present the scope and information to you, and then I'm going to come back at the end and I'll start talking about money for each one of the scenarios when we get there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John to talk about the first scenario. Thanks, John.
You bet. Thanks, Shannon. So scenario A. Scenario A is our entire project list completed over just 10 years. So pretty ambitious, right? So what projects? These are all projects on our current 10-year plan. They're all the projects on our unconstrained project list that, as Shannon mentioned, has been revised and actually reduced a little bit. So these two mechanisms, all of those projects, 112 projects in all, 112 projects, and among the three scenarios here, A, B, and C, this really, we feel, represents the upper bound in terms of number of projects, the scope, the scale, and of course, the cost of projects over this 10-year analysis period. So let's take a look, a little more detail into this scenario A. First of all, it addresses system-wide fire flow. So 100% throughout our system, fire flow throughout our entire community actually includes 40 waterline projects, hydrant installations, and booster station improvement projects. So next we look at asset maintenance and replacement programs. These include individual pump replacements, not the whole station, but the individual pumps like a booster pump. It also includes electrical upgrades, tank coatings, but this also includes replacement of aging assets, especially booster stations and tanks. Next, we look at asset management programs, again, to extend the life of our assets. So this includes corrosion protection systems, it includes pressure monitoring, SCADA, district metered areas. And finally, we look at system optimization projects. And so Shelley thinks everybody knows what these projects are. But for those who don't, system optimization projects are new assets. These are not replacing existing assets. So when you think optimization, think new assets, new projects, new programs that are increasing and improving the reliability and redundancy of our system. So here's some examples that are in this scenario. A new well and a new water line. A new water line on Pioneer Trail, for example, where no water line currently exists, and it connects disparate parts of our distribution system, two different pressure zones. It connects the two zones, so there's water reliability and redundancy between, in that extended zone. So that's just one example of a system optimization project that's included as part of this scenario. So a lot's included. There are some exclusions. Let's take a look at what is excluded from this scenario. Again, getting back to that unconstrained project list, we went all through that. We actually deleted over 24 projects that were on that list. Again, we found projects that were basically met the same goals. So we eliminated this duplication of projects. We also met with our crews and other departments and eliminated low value, low priority projects. So those are not part of the plan. And finally, this scenario also excludes waterline replacements solely due to aging assets. So we are doing 40 waterline projects, as I mentioned. So we are chipping away at those old water lines. Because each one of those 40 projects will be replacing old 50-year plus water lines. But there are no water lines on here just because they're leaking too much or getting too old. So that's what's included, that's what's excluded. Is there any questions on this scenario at this time before we take a look at scenario B?
Yeah. Is it possible to even do 112 projects in 10 years? That was my question.
It's possible. It would be expensive, right? And I mean, even I would say our staff would not be able to do that level of projects in that period of time.
And that's why
Julie agrees. I think we do that.
There's money added to the construction of the projects to pay for either additional staff or consultancy of the done. So the dollar figure you're looking at accomplishes the project. However, it would probably be a mixture of the two.
Why did you guys choose this as the upper limit? Because this is like In other words, is this a realistic upper limit? Should there be a little more realistic one?
I mean, there's other scenarios, and at the end of the presentation, we'll talk about other scenarios to look at, or maybe not include this one. But we thought this was a way to look at, these are all our known projects. If the board felt we needed to get all those done in 10 years, here's the cost. And what kind of rate structure would that look like? Over 10 years, over 5 years, maybe over 20 years?
Oh, just a real quick addition to that. Follow up with your question, because this may be the ultimate plan you still want to have go forward, but you just may want to do it over a longer period of time.
Right. I just didn't know if this was on the table for shock value, or...
You're getting $10.
We had to start somewhere in the analysis, and so we didn't feel like us making the decision about what should come off of that particular list. We wanted you to make that decision, or at least present it to you and ask us to adjust.
Whenever I bought a car, it's kind of been this way, and it's, well, what's the price? Well, we'll just wait till the end, you wait till you see these tires. You don't want your kids to drive without being safe, do you?
What have you guys identified that's out there that needs replacement? Something needs to be done?
Yeah.
And this is the list. You've seen the dollar figure before, when I know the spring list.
Right.
It was well over $200 million for investment because of the effort that's been gone through eliminating the projects and the
So we
local
can
projects.
finally get rid of that one draft ball.
Oh, the one.
Yeah, finally get rid of that one. Thank you.
I'm gonna walk away with the agreement
Just
just
yesterday we got it.
Question.
My last question will be after the end.
Okay, why did you pick 10 years and not a 20-year and 50-year?
Right now, the three scenarios are set up for 10-year planning horizon, but the board can say, hey, let's take a look at this over 20 years or some other increment.
I think we should be looking at 20 years. Yeah, I did think a little uncertain as you get that out there, but at least you got placeholders for certain jobs and things that you know you're going to have to do in year 11 or 15 or whatever. Maybe you're not waiting till the end of the presentation.
I'm waiting till the end, I'm gonna get it for you.
Okay, well,
We certainly have projections of that information, right? We looked at that. We made a decision not to present that to you today because we wanted to focus on these scenarios, what we're proposing to present again to the rate consultant to look at, and don't believe that the rate consultant is necessarily going to be looking at a 20-year plan. They're going to be looking at how do you fund, what do you got to do to fund this 10-year program. That's what the basis of the presentation was about. We definitely have more information, but we didn't want to bury you even further with the details beyond this.
what I'd like to see is a nice slope on that curve or chart, so that we're not, like we've done this last 10 years, nothing practically, and then it's going to jump up 10 years if it gets put back 1 year or year. But I think looking at 20 years and 100 years, there are a lot of communities that do look at that 100-year plan.
And that's getting into the next scenario.
Okay, all right. Well, anyway, I thought we were looking at that, that's really, you got to do a lot of crystal ball type stuff.
Right.
But at least you have a long-term plan.
This scenario addresses the knowns and how long we take to do that, what the plans are. Those are all conversations we can absolutely have, and we'll develop whatever you do as far as how much it costs to deliver all these projects in what time frame. You tell us what time frame you'd like us to look at it, and we can develop that.
Yeah, we look at these as 10-year based scenarios, and you can extend the time or the rate that we complete these projects, or what you want to see completed in 10 years or 5 years or over 20 years. So,
And I like the idea of the kind of long-term looking at, percentage of the assets being replaced. And I know Richard's gone to some of those asset management meetings or where they discussed it, where they look at 1 to 2% increase each year for replacement of assets.
so you may be interested in this next scenario. And so just do it, just do it. So with that, let's bring up Julie, she'll talk about scenario B.
Into state.
Good afternoon. So moving on to scenario B. The goal of scenario B, which is our 100-year asset lifecycle replacement program, the first 10 years of that, is to develop a plan that addresses the end of life of our water system facilities. I think we all recognize that the facilities that we currently have, most of them were not designed to last 100 years. So some of them may end up having a shorter life than 100 years. But with solid routine maintenance programs and frequent upkeep of these facilities, we expect that we can get many of them to last 100 years or more. So we decided that 100 years is actually a good target for a capital program that's really focused on the health and life of our assets. To develop the project list, we had to start by making an evaluation of all the facilities within the system. We're talking about the water lines, the pump stations, the wells, and the PRVs. And the overall goal is to develop a list of projects for this first 10 years that replaces about 10% of the total facilities in that 10-year period, or 1% per year. So to develop that project list, once we had a handle on the evaluation of the system, we started with that complete project list that John presented. And then we drilled into it a little bit more to identify what projects on the list were really being driven by asset replacements of tanks, of boosters, of wells, and so on. And we brought those onto the list first. And then we started talking about maintenance and what do we need to have in place to really help the rest of our system make it to that 100-year marker. And so we brought the asset management programs, those pressure management and district metered areas like John was talking about. We brought those onto the list second. And then we acknowledge that we have some current system optimization projects that we need to move forward with because we're already committed, like the meters, and brought those onto the list. And what we were left with was a plan that in the first 10 years focuses very highly on getting caught up on some water line replacements, getting caught up on some booster station and tank replacements. And at the same time moves forward these asset management programs, but it does defer some of this regular maintenance into the next 10 years, years 10 to 20. So there's not much on this list that is a 20-year pump replacement cycle. There's not much on this list that speaks to tank coatings and so on. Because we really think it's important to get those asset management programs in place first so that we can use them to inform the future and extend the life of the assets. So in the end, what we end up with is a complete project list that is every project that was in scenario A being completed over 20 years with this really asset management focus in the first 10. So do you have any questions on scenario B?
So my understanding is you need the program in place before you can really tell us what's needed.
So it's the asset management programs are all these, like a valve exercising program for our water crew, so that they can go around and have a systematic way of checking the critical valves in our system so that they know whether they work or not, and then that helps them develop their plan for replacing valves. We don't have one of those now. That is as robust as we need for a reliable.
should wait till the end, but what I'm looking for is, I want to make sure I understand what are programs and what are replacements. You know, how much do we have in for consultants and programs? How much do we have in for actual fixing things? And I realize the program is important. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm kind of dumb. I just asked my teenager. But that's what I wanted to make sure of, that I have a good understanding of.
And I think I see the distinction that you're getting at, and we do have some of that information available because we have segregated these asset management programs from the other projects that are actually replacing or upkeeping assets. It's not presented in the slides, but we've got it handy, so.
I'll ask other questions later.
With that, if there's no further questions on the 100-year life cycle scenario, I'll pass it on to Steve.
Good afternoon. So the scenario that I'm going to talk about is our fire flow scenario, providing fire flow to district-wide in the next 10 years and what that would take. So we know that we have gaps and deficiencies in our system where we don't have adequate fire flow for certain areas. So what we did is we looked at that entire project list. We identified those projects that would address those deficiencies, and we created a project list that only has those fire flow projects on it. And so the goal of this plan is to outline what it would take to provide adequate fire flow to our entire system within 10 years. And then the remainder of the project list would be completed in the second 10 years. So it's also a 20-year plan. And ultimately a 20-year plan. So what is in this scenario? So what we have are upsizing areas of our system where we know we have small water lines that don't have adequate fire flow or that don't have hydrants on them. So of the 40 projects that John mentioned that are water line projects that we've already identified, 24 of them do address fire flow deficiencies. And so all 24 of those projects are included in this plan. We also have projects for additional hydrants, which would be filling in the gaps of our coverage area. Sometimes our hydrant spacing is too large, so it would be adding hydrants in throughout our system. We also have some pump station projects where we would be increasing the capacity and the reliability of those pump stations so that we could deliver fire flow to certain parts of our system in an emergency. And then, as well as the asset management programs that Julie had talked about, we would have those included in this plan because, as Dwayne, you mentioned, we need to know what we need to have the program set up to figure out what we don't know before we can define what any of those future projects are. And then we do have some optimization projects that address fire flow included in these, and John actually alluded to one in his presentation about the water line down Pioneer Trail. It would also increase the redundancy and reliability of delivering fire flow to certain areas of our system. So those types of projects have been included. And we included meters as well because we're knee-deep into that and we want to get that completed and finished. So what isn't in the plan is the pump replacements, electric and maintenance projects, the electrical upgrades and tank coatings that Julie mentioned that are not in scenario B as well. These get pushed beyond the 10-year plan and would be completed in the second 10 years. Any non-fire flow related optimization project, so there's other projects that we have that we would like to do because they do have some improvement to the system, but they're not related to fire flow. So we have not included those. And we have not included any water lines due to leaky pipes or bad condition of pipes, or just small pipes either. So the small pipe, we have some areas that are small pipes, but they do have adequate fire flow, but we have not included those on this list. And then finally, any non-fire flow related asset replacements. So that would be any sort of tank replacements or booster station upgrades that we don't have a fire flow issue, but there may be a an age or condition-related issue that we need to address, but that's not included in this plan. So that kind of is the overview of scenario C. If there's any questions, I'd like to answer them.
I think this one I think is a good idea to do as a standalone, because this is something that we could do in addition to, or change the time frame or whatever, so this is information.
All right, with that, I'll turn it over to Shannon to talk.
Just one quick question. How much of the fire flow projects are included in the entire, the A scenario?
In the A scenario, all of them.
All of our,
Yeah, all of them are included in A. Almost all of them are included in B.
Yes, you're wondering what this costs. So, in scenario A, 161 million in over 10 years. Scenario B, 106 million over 10 years. And scenario C, 88 million over 10 years. We came up with these numbers, putting these project lists together. These aren't random estimates. We actually have project lists that support for each one of these scenarios. We calculated what the cost would be, the total project costs for in 2018 dollars, and then equally spread those over the 10 years, and then increased applied inflation rates of 3% to those projects over that 10-year period. So these are the inflated numbers. These are not 2018 dollars. If you look at the current 10-year capital improvement program for water, the value in there is 37.8 million, and it also has that same escalation factored into it as well. So we're trying to compare apples to apples as we look at these various scenarios. We do have this whole presentation in a handout if you would like that. If you have questions now you want to talk about, I'm happy to address whatever you'd like to discuss.
just one more comment, that now famous chart with the, first 10 years and second 10 years up here, that unconstrained list, that project total was well over 200 million.
It's 224 million, and we took the scenario A and spread that over 20 years, and with the projects that we have removed, adjustments that we've made, that came out to about 189 million, so it removed roughly $35 million off of the cost of that plan over 20 years, to kind of compare, again, apples to apples.
So the duplications in each one of these scenarios, what would it be the total cost of all of those projects in those three areas?
I'm not following exactly your question. So,
the things that you do in the 100-year cycle, or the fire flow, that there may be duplication.
yes.
Okay. What would be the total amount of dollars if you took all of these and merged them?
That would be scenario A. That would be scenario A.
That's the way.
Yeah. And that's part of how we kind of built these scenarios, was taking scenario A, pulling out of it and saying the 100-year plan, maintenance plan, what do those numbers look like? Just standing alone, 100-year maintenance, not thinking about the fire flow issue with the community. And then we looked at fire flow standing alone, what do we need to achieve that? And there is a difference between B and C, and those projects, all the projects in C are not included in B. But the thought process is if you were to raise rates to that level, we would, my expectation is we can focus on getting the fire flow projects done. It just pushes out other optimization and other projects out into the second 20 years.
Getting closer to 1% a year.
Right.
Asset management over a long period of time, so.
Yeah.
And I realize I'm talking to people who have a higher level degree of education than me. So please give me, I want to make sure I get this right. When I had my restaurants, one of the things I learned is to, for instance, let's say I had wanted to build a 12-foot salad bar that's going to cost me $30,000. I would look at what would happen if I did nothing. That's usually something you see in the business plan. What happens if we do nothing?
And and that's one of the things I was getting at with my three questions, and kind of laying the foundation for these scenarios. I assume there is a fourth scenario here that is already going to the rate consultant, and that's 0%. That's no rate increases for the next 5 years, or potentially for the next 10 years. Whatever that scenario is, that's, in my mind, that's this end of the bracket, and then these projects, or these scenarios, are the other end of the bracket. So what initially the rate consultant would be analyzing would be those four scenarios.
That would be good to make sure.
Would it be smart to go to 0 and not start at, let's say, year 3 that we've been assuming for inflation?
And that's 100%, I guess, a question for you, and that's part of that third question that I wanted to pose is what those, what percentages would you like us to look at as that other bracket? And my expectation again is that this is just setting the table, and then we will have much more discussion about what you're actually proposing to do and take to the community as proposals. What are those numbers? What are those scenarios? What additional scenarios would you like the consultant to evaluate? In my mind, it's difficult to ask the consultant to come up with those without knowing what the spectrum is. And so we're trying to lay the spectrum out for you so that you can decide what you want to achieve. For example, if we do, if there is a scenario, a rate X gives us scenario C, we can show you all the projects that account for scenario C, and then if we take off 5% from that and reduce X by 5%, then we can look at what that impact does. What projects are not going to get done in that time period?
I think I think you're on the right track here, because when people budget, a lot of times it's not, well, let's say I'd like to do this, it costs this much. They say, like, the community might only be able, let's say, to handle a certain amount of dollars, a certain percentage. Now, you as a staff, what's the best way to spend the money that you're limited to?
Yeah.
Another way to look at what you just said.
Exactly. Instead of coming at it from that side of the equation, our perspective was, again, let's set the table, let's give you the spectrum, and we can go from there.
Because I think both people in general, you guys and the public, I think we to first understand is what are all the potential, all the needs out there in the system. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? We've got aging assets, we've got fire flows, finishing the meters. If you show the numbers first, everybody just focuses on the numbers. You got to have at least an understanding of what those dollar amounts are buying you, and then we all can make decisions on prioritizing how much can we afford, and then the prioritization of what that's going to buy.
Yeah, what I'm looking at is because you spend your money on what you value. You can look at a household budget, no matter what you say, where you spend your money is what you value. And so what do our ratepayers value? Safety from fires, fresh water, no surprises, those kinds of things. And so I try to look at it from that standpoint. And I was also, one question I wanted to ask, and I think I know because of how much we're spending, how many projects based on our normal level of activity can we do in a year? What kind of dollars? It's not 10 million that everybody's stretched at, and what type? Are they programs or are they construction? And those two are different in a sense. So I just want to get a feel of that, as you don't have to answer today because that's a big question. The other is...
I actually think we might be able to answer that question. And Julie, I'm going to call you out a little bit, but you've done some analysis on past capital improvement programs and staffing levels associated with that. I don't know if you were able to do that off the top of your head.
Well, to give you a sense, when I added the actual expenditures from our capital accounts over the last 10 years, we've spent about $57 million in 10 years with the staff that we have. So that's about, half of some of these.
Okay.
And we've been operating at full capacity, wouldn't you agree, John?
Yeah, if you look at the number of projects, there are eight or nine projects kind of per year. construction projects, and they cut a number of other programs. And it also depends on the type of project that you're doing. A waterline project is a lot, very easy to design and build and inspect versus a generator project or DVR.
As a board member, my opinion has been, and I want to make sure I'm trying to evaluate as we go along whether I've been right or wrong, is to handle bubbles of activity with, outside people so that we're not paying them the rest of their lives. But if the amount of work has stayed steady, then if we don't have enough people designing projects in-house, then maybe I was wrong and it's better to do something in-house or around. So that's one of the questions as we go along with this that I'd like to look at. And then, Julie, you said something that I think is important. When we go out there and we say, everything's going to blow up in 100 years, that's just not true. It could be 60 years or it could be 140 years. And what you guys do, based on new technologies, like Catholic protection. Because it's holy water, I guess. But it's important to know what new technologies might or might not be out there that will change things, like types of slip lining. Because everybody's facing this, and that's what kind of crunch on all these districts is going to create some innovation and activity, probably from our people too. So I wanted to kind of know that, and then.
Can I talk briefly, if I can address the first part?
Questions. So go ahead.
So the first part was maybe somewhat of an observation about, the bubble in the capital plan. I think an example of that is what we've been doing the last few years. We had a peak in that capital plan that has happened because of the meters project. We were spending $25+ million in a fairly short period of time to get the meters installed. And what we've had to do to adapt to that is we brought on some temporary term employees to fill in some of the gaps, but we were still consumed. That's a very heavy load. To John's point, it depends on what kind of project it is. The meters is very labor intensive, so we brought on that short-term staff for 4-year term contracts, but we also have had to go out and bring in some consulting help to do other projects as well. The Big Five condition assessment is an example. The Heavenly Keller project is an example. So we brought in a bunch of resources to handle that bubble. If you were to approve a fairly steadily funded capital improvement program, we could then staff to handle that workload and not have to bring people in to deal with the bubble. Or we could say we're going to staff to this level, and then the rest of that is going to be handled with consultants or other staff.
Right, it's almost micromanagement, so I only want to go so deep, but the type of employees we have will determine how we handle this workload, and as we look ahead, I'm hoping that is considered. Do we need project managers? Do we need project implementers or designers?
But and remember,
How do we staff for that?
we got the money added to these construction project costs to basically do either bring in consultants or add staff. So it's not a money issue. But you're right, it's like depending on what projects are on the list, we may make a decision for us in terms of what type of additional help.
We built that cost into the assessment.
And anything over about 20 years is a pretty big guess when it comes to a lot of this stuff. And will we have the time, will we have enough of our system analyzed, especially the sewer out by the lake and up towards...
I'm assuming that presentation's...
That would be more, I mean, we quite honestly, we haven't quite all those numbers.
Decisions today, I'm not ready.
We've done the analysis. This is on the water system, right? So we've gone through the analysis process, and I gotta say, my hat's off to this team, because they have gone through and crunched a lot of numbers and looked at a lot of data and done a lot of iterations to come up with these scenarios and these concepts concepts, we have done more assessment and evaluation and planning for our system with this exercise and this effort than we have ever done, to my understanding, at this district. We've really tried to put our planning hats on and say, what do we need to be doing for the future, and looking at things much less from even less from a reactionary standpoint than we have in the past. We've done good planning. This has taken us to an entirely new level.
And I'll ask a lot of questions because in my mind, I have, two jobs. One is to make sure the finances of the district are correct and to hire the top management. That's what we do, and I just want to make sure I'm getting it straight.
Well, and infrastructure is the thing that's going on in this country. Even the politicians in Washington understand that infrastructure is a big deal, how to fund it and everything. So if they can figure it out, it really is. And the balance here is, how much, there's a lot of needs that have been identified, and there are lists of projects that add up to these numbers. Real projects, real scopes have been identified. This isn't just making estimates, projections, and percentages of the value of the system, but a real project, and your guys' job on how to meld that with affordability.
And last night I was at our chambers. We put on a real nice forum. But before the forum, Dr. Borges did a deal on the national debt, but he also looked at the debt of California cities. And our city is 24th out of 500 something.
The higher on the list, the worse.
Yeah, and so we have $24,000 per resident. We're up with LA, San Diego, and then, but our income is one of the lowest, so we have this huge debt to equity ratio of our community, and it's not our debt, it's just the city's debt. They won't even.
Which is a large percentage of our rate of
fiduciary responsibility to take care of $2 billion of infrastructure that we have out there.
Yeah.
And I've been involved in water since I got out of college in '60. That's 50 years. And, there's always a thought, somebody, well, with technology will take care of it, we don't have to do anything else. Well, yeah, it comes in increments, but you still got infrastructure like the dam up at Oroville. They didn't take care of the things that they should have, and then they have a catastrophe. We had a catastrophe out in the Keys that if we had been taking care of that beforehand, we could have slipped lined that for probably less than $10,000. It cost us $400,000. We can't afford to wait. You need to move ahead.
You're preaching to the choir, but it's just how much our community can afford and how we do it and how much we can do.
There's some things
within time periods. We're not going to argue tonight.
But there's some things we can't afford to put off.
I agree.
And it's going to cost us more in the future if we don't do it.
I think those debates are upcoming, Jim.
We'll get at it.
So anyway, so to come back to my original three questions that we started the presentation with, what do you think about these scenarios? Again, adding the fourth, which is, and that's another question here, is what's the other part of that bracket that you would like us to look at? Do you think submitting these scenarios and finding out what the costs are is appropriate?
Shannon, can I put you on hold for just a second?
Sure.
Eric, did you have something relevant to what we were just talking about? Oh, I hope so. Well, come on up so we can all hear you.
Eric Schaefer, citizen. I think in all these scenarios, you may want to think about effects of any of these that are looked at and potentially adopted, and how it affects the community. For example, if you do all the fire flow stuff, there would be some hope that fire insurance rates would go down. I just got my renewal notice, and it's $500, which is about 30% higher.
And sometimes they're just coming on and just canceling people.
Exactly.
Okay, so I guess if the Fire Institute can be contacted and say, what happens if we're a totally compliant community with all the water you would need? What would that do for community property owners? The second thing is, if you do extensive miles of water line replacement, we're in the scenario where we're repaving half the streets because most of them go to the streets. And the question is, can the city follow behind and do their part to make those streets whole? Or do we have a situation that we have in the state streets?
That's a good question, Eric, and you know the answer as well as I do.
Well, yeah, but if with some planning, maybe there's an opportunity to think about it and do something about it.
Well, I just let you know.
So that was just an
We have
example.
discussed about this a number of times with our city ad hoc committee meetings. And so we'll see what this new election brings with city council people. We will definitely be right back on this issue.
But the question is, if you pump up the number of miles of water line you're doing, you're pumping up that opportunity or the challenge for the city to follow in and do what they need to do
Good
for
point.
their side of the water.
Excellent.
And that's just one example. I mean, I think there's other things in the community that could be effective, no matter which scenario you adopt.
Things the community values. That's
One thing we've always done is that when the city in the past has come up with some money to do paving projects, we've always taken a look at our system, and if the water line is on the list to replace on that street, that gets moved up to the top of the list. So we're not going back in and tearing up a freshly paved asphalt job that the city public works department kind of frowns on.
In addition,
Well, I understand, you know, and understand that it takes us longer to get ready to do a water line job than it does them to get ready to do a paving job. We get done with a set of plans.
They don't have any money to budget this year.
They can decide to move, you know, a project at the last minute and pave different streets. We can't do that on the water line. So when the blame was put on us and we didn't make that coordinated, the reality is we couldn't move it. Can't move our project at the last minute. So if there was a last minute adjustment,
But we had coordinated with them.
we had coordinated.
They just
We responded, and they're telling us they were gonna pave the state line streets, and then the money didn't get budgeted or appropriated, and so, we ended up going out there. We were already outbidding when they changed their mind, so.
Eric, just to let you know, one of the things that also came up in our discussions with the city is a certain flexibility on their part. So if we did a water line that affected a certain number of square feet of asphalt along the street, they might opt for us to do the entire street instead of half the street with a trench patch if it was better for the condition of the road. And so they are starting to, you know, have a little flexibility with that. Now, that was given to us in some conversations. We will definitely keep reminding them of that scenario.
And we have met with city staff many times to try and get some sort of plan to help us prioritize and rank our projects. What we've been told, at least in recent years, is, as you said, Dwayne, they don't have any money budgeted, so they don't have a plan. Therefore, we're doing what we're doing.
So, to answer your questions, you said you have 3 of them. Should 3 scenarios be presented for rate analysis? They can be, because they all seem very sound and they look like they're well thought out, and a lot of times they're put them together. I think ultimately the second question will be, there's probably a hybrid of those 3, because if you look at the 3, the one thing that's consistent is the dollar, right? 160, 100 and something, 88. So it's basically package deals. You know, you got red, yellow, and green, and maybe we're looking at brown, technically. So with that said, you know, we have to spend money on the system. The 100-year plan is typically, I mean, I think it's like a Golden Gate Bridge model, right? I mean, we're just gonna start at one end and work our way to the other, and 100 years later, we'll be back at the beginning. Right. It could end up being that one. So for the third question,
Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
Just real quick. As far as these 3 scenarios are concerned, again, we're just going to the rate consultant with these 3, and then whatever the other end of the bracket is that you'd like us to look at, we're not saying, we're going to come back with other scenarios that get analyzed. Once we get these looked at, we'll be here talking to you about it again and saying, what else do you want us to look at?
kind of what I think I was saying.
Okay.
Okay, so we all agree that, you know, I mean, we may focus on higher flow, we may focus on something else, but at the end of the day, we're gonna have to focus on all of it somewhere. So, and how much we can do in the time span we have. And with all these variables we don't know, like for instance, Lynn's fantastic grant writing abilities may actually pay for half the fire flow for all we know. We don't know. Okay, so to get to the third question, what I think we should do there is really use history as our rudder. And I don't know what the rates have been over historical. We had that at one time, remember? Historically,
We still maintain that.
What this is illustrating up here, though, is what we have been using for the last several years is the assumed 2%, which is one of the reasons why the one slide that Shannon was showing that showed what the current 10-year plan was, which was 37 million compared to the lowest of these three options, which is 88. And the reason it can only fund 37.8 million is because the current 10-year plan has year 1 at 5 and then 9 years at 2.
I think that's
And the new plan is obviously going to have 5 years based on whatever the 5-year rate increase scenarios are going to be, and then 5 years at something else.
But if we use history to figure out what our assumptions should be for any future increases, that would be a more logical choice, right? Because we know what the last 5 years were, but what about the 5 years before that, maybe even the 5 years before that? What were they, averaged on a yearly basis for, say, 15 years? I would think it's probably a little more than 2.
It is now because of the last 5 years.
Yes. So, I think a safe assumption would be historically, it's going to be something close to what we had before. And oddly, when Eric was in office, we used to talk about this steady, slight incline of 4%. And I don't know if that's accurate, but that's close. It's 3% historically.
Look at that, in our construction cost index over 10, 15 years, that's 3%. I think we're probably looking at something quite a bit more than that right now, looking forward, but historically, maybe a 3% number is something just to keep pace with the cost of construction.
Yeah, and it's just an assumption, right? You can put every number you want in there, it's just that infamous graph.
If you're going to look at history, you need to go back to the 70s. There was a period there where rates weren't raised a lot, and then when all the problems happened and the moratoriums and the no connections, things like that, then we had to raise it quite a bit. And then we had a kind of a gradual, we're catching up. And then the last 10 years, it's really dropped off as far as the overall average increase. So, you can't just look at the last 5 or the last 10 years. That's misleading. And now we're getting to a position like we were in the late 70s when we had to spend a lot of money going into the 80s, and that's when we hired Richard to solve our problems in Alpine County.
Well, one thing I was just going to say, with that program, though, was funded by the Clean Water Grant program from Washington. So the Harvey Place construction and the conversion of this plant from tertiary to advanced secondary. It's about a $30 million program. And this district got 87.5% grant money from the feds and the state to do that. Locals only have to pay 12.5%. Well, those days are long gone. And that's why there's such a huge issue about infrastructure replacement and asset management. There's no longer those programs are around, so the locals have to foot the vast majority of that ratio of 87.5 to 12 is probably reversed. If we get 12.5% grant money, 87.5%, that's close to reality.
That'd be considered a success.
Yes.
Honestly, the challenge for us is going to be the ability of our ratepayers to withstand rate increases, and that's ultimately our problem, right? If we had the money sitting right there, I'd say spend it, let's get it done. Yeah, but that's not the reality of our life.
I have been thinking about this question 3 just a little bit here recently, and in my mind there are another 3 approaches. I like to do things in 3s, right? So we could assume, if we can ask the rate consultant to say, what does it cost to pay for each one of these scenarios in the 5-year Prop 218 process? What does it cost to do that? And then on the second 5 years, we can assume a 2%, a 3%, or a 0 for those second 5 years. It's kind of one approach guidance we can give the rate consultant. Or we could tell him to say, okay, what does it look like if you do evenly distributed rate increases over 10 years? What does that look like? And then you have a gradual curve paying for all of this at one time, at ultimately 1% rate increase, but it's spread over all 10 years. That's another approach, kind of a gradual. I think what we've heard at times from the community is that folks prefer a gradual rate increase over time rather than big chunks taking place over a year's process. And then we could set those percentages. The guidance we give to the rate consultant could be to look at on that second 5 years again something else than 3 or 2 or 0. we could set some other number that is larger for that second 5-year period. Again, some of this will come back when we get information from the rate consultant about these scenarios, but is there any guidance or any questions you want to ask them to look at scenarios as far as how to do those rate increases, particularly for the second 5 years?
Well, we might want to see, the asset management, how far I could think that's diagnostic. Then the other thing I wanted to mention that I did in my business that was sometimes successful, is I asked myself, what is it that I can cut out of what I'm already doing in order to raise the same amount of money? Or, and in our case, we can't necessarily just get more customers except through affordable housing units or something. But I'll give an example. The good job we've done with the PERS initiating new employees, how we handle those costs has made a big difference in where our payroll is. And so there are other ways to help, and I'm going to be hoping that we look at some of those. There's just a multitude of ways that an organization can save money that they never knew they could do until they were put up against it. So, like, cut out the board salaries.
And I think we did some of that in the past when we cut drastically our O&M costs. And so we've gone through somewhat of that exercise, and we haven't rebounded from that. Well, but we haven't rebounded from that. We're still less than what we were. I can't remember what the numbers are, but from 2008, we're still below that. We have maintained that savings instead of rebounding from it when the economy came back.
That's an example of what I'm talking about. And we can't solve all our problems. Solar, that'll solve that. Other than that, there might be ways to do it. To look at just other ways to skin cat. So the question I asked was on the asset management. Does that include a diagnostic period of time? And what is that you're using? What is that number of years you're looking at on it? Each one is different, maybe.
And Julie has done this analysis much more thoroughly than I, and has really done the analysis. But it's my understanding that what we're talking about is various programs. And so cathodic protection, or cathode protection, as you would prefer to say, that is an example of how we extend the life of steel pipelines. What is included in the plans is a pilot study to look at doing that in areas where we have thin-walled steel pipe. What does a small pilot study look like? What is the actual cost of doing that? And so it develops a pilot study, and then an implementation is budgeted in here for that pilot study, but not the full process in that one given place. So that's a case where we're doing a near-term implementation, but then looking at what we should budget long-term to protect those assets, as opposed to what's included in here, the district metered areas, which will give us more information about our assets and how where leaks are occurring, where we're losing water, which tells us more about which pipelines are starting to fail. That is included in here as being fully implemented in these plans. So it kind of depends on which program we're talking about, and we're not talking about. We say programs because they're not an asset replacement project, but it really is fairly narrowly focused. And obviously, Julie has more information.
And that was the last question I had for today, anyway.
I just wanted to add that the asset management programs that we defined here, we defined 6 of them. And the various programs have different levels of upfront costs. Some of them are more expensive, some of them are less expensive on the front end, but all of them have some degree of ongoing cost that's going to extend past the first 10 years to 10 to 20, 20 to 30. They go on.
I was just speaking, okay, that was what I was asking, is are we looking basically with most of our assets 20 years, 10 years, so that we can know what we're budgeting for in terms of asset management. That's all.
And we can,
you don't have to answer today. This is going to be a little bit of an ongoing process.
And our expectation is, as we go forward, when we get to talking about real rates and actual percentages, we can provide, we'll bring in these spreadsheets and go through them for that given scenario, what each one of these things mean, and go into much more detail at that point into scenarios that you are looking to and are interested in funding.
So, we keep talking about 5-year plans, and we don't have to do a 5-year plan. I personally feel that this 5-year plan was a mistake. We shortly into it, we realized that we had a lot of projects we were going to get funded. The increase did not cover, well, it only covered the cost of living increase of the ENR index increases and per meter. So we had no money for capital improvement projects, and plus we reduced our revenues by cutting the connection fees to less than what they were 10 years ago. So I'm so happy. And if you remember, staff recommended a 9% increase 5 years ago. We wouldn't be in this deep.
We have different jobs to do. Our staff have a little bit different.
Our main job is the fiduciary responsibility to take care of $2 billion. That's our main job.
Well, there will be much discussion over the next 6 months on this subject, so we'll see how it all plays out.
They're just trying to get a feel for where we're at, and I'm trying to find out.
Well, it's a complicated subject, and we will be having this discussion repeatedly so that we have a full understanding of the needs, so we can make an educated decision on what's important, what's the most important thing to fund, and what's not.
I've enjoyed the discussion today. We need sometimes need these round robin discussions to get a.
So we'll talk more about these, and then, as I said, coming is, I don't know exactly what the date is, but the suicide discussion will follow basically.
The suicide, you still want to collect a little more data.
We still have some data collection and a lot of number crunching right now.
And the water side is a little different. Than our new TV truck, if we would have had that maybe 2 years prior, it'd be a little different, but yeah. We have it now, so we're making use of it. It's a good deal.
It's one good thing about suicide is we don't have the major capacity issue that we have on the water side with the lack of firefighters. And that system was designed to carry the sewage from, the development, and that's.
And actually, the flows to the plant have actually decreased over the last few years. So.
And we're going through a very similar process to what you see here, what we talked about originally, without the fire flow conversation on the sewer side. But we're going to go through a very similar process with an additional data of being the field, the actual asset assessments that we've been doing, and projecting from those asset assessments what we think failure rates are. I just wanted to summarize my understanding of the answers to these questions. We are planning to go forward with these 3 scenarios, plus we will look at another one to bracket on the other end, on the other side of the spectrum. At this point, not hearing any specific direction on other scenarios to analyze at this time, and then we'll work with Paul and look at those percentages and what we did historically to try and come up with maybe a couple of options for what we do in the second 5 years for paying for these assets. Is it more?
I would suggest utilizing a 0 in years 6 through 10, so that you're not automatically assuming that a future board is going to increase rates to accomplish your 10-year plan, or the average, whatever the average has been. But I wouldn't assume that a future board will adopt an exact 5-year rate schedule that you may adopt later on.
I mean, it's actually year to year when it comes down to it.
That's true.
Again, forecasting purposes, you would rather have it be lower because it makes your job complicated if we forecast a higher rate and it's less.
It makes it more difficult to plan for the future.
Yeah, so that was a yeah, I don't think.
It makes, if you go 0 on those years out, even though 0 is probably highly unlikely, it does make the future look more bleak.
Right.
That's the big red line. Yeah, you're right, exactly.
It's the red lines, the front of it.
Right.
Back.
Yeah, those are the numbers.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll have a lot more discussion about this in the future. Feel free to reach out with any questions you have, and I guess we'll hand out those packets shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I have nothing else on the agenda in front of me. We're still on the staff attorney reports. Is there anything else to go over here before we jump into closed session? I'm not seeing a lot, so you can all read the past and future meetings. At this time, I'd like to move out of open session and move to closed session.
Coming out of closed session and open session, notes in the report,